Captain Rachel Ray Walker adjusted her flight jacket as the early morning sun glinted off the C-130 Hercules parked on the tarmac at Peterson Air Force Base. The massive cargo plane had been her companion for years, each rivet and seam familiar under her fingertips. Today's mission should have been routine, a coast-to-coast cargo delivery, supplies and equipment for a relief operation. The kind of flight where pilots pass time with trivia or coffee, counting down the hours. But Ray had learned long ago that no flight, no matter how mundane it seemed, was ever truly predictable. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Jamal Reed, was a fresh-faced officer barely 2 years out of flight school. He was competent, meticulous, and nervous in the way that made Ray's instincts sharpen. "Coffee," he offered, holding the travel mug out. Ray shook her head, her gaze fixed on the runway. The engines hummed to life, a steady vibration thrumming through the cockpit. There was a rhythm to flying, a symphony of gauges, dials, and wind, and Ray loved it. But she loved flying most when there was more at stake than routine deliveries. As the Hercules rolled down the runway, the mountains stretching beneath them like jagged blue teeth, Ray allowed herself a rare moment of thought. She had chosen cargo flights for the peace, for the anonymity. After her Top Gun days, the relentless pressure of fighter aviation had burned her out. Leaving the Navy had felt like shedding a second skin, though sometimes, in quiet moments, the adrenaline called to her. Today, though, was just another cargo flight, or so she thought. The radio crackled, slicing through the morning calm like a lightning bolt. "Mayday, Mayday, Flight 927, engine fire, losing altitude." The voice was panicked, shrill, but professional, likely an airliner. Ray's pulse spiked. She glanced at Jamal, whose eyes mirrored the same shock she felt. "Flight 927, she repeated, trying to sound composed. The flight path on the HUD showed a passenger plane spiraling downward, smoke trailing from one engine. Her stomach tightened. The manifest, nearly 300 passengers, families, children, elderly travelers. Every life a number until she made it real, every name a responsibility that pressed on her shoulders. Ray's hands gripped the yoke instinctively, her mind racing. In fighter school, they had trained her for high-speed engagements, dogfights, and impossible maneuvers. Cargo flying was supposed to be simpler, safer, controlled. But the core skills were the same: assessment, precision, timing. "We're going to intercept," she told Jamal, voice calm but firm, leaving no room for doubt. He nodded, swallowing hard, hands hovering over the communications panel. "You really think we can?" Ray cut him off with a look that brooked no hesitation. They were already moving. There was no thinking, only action. The Hercules climbed toward the stricken airliner, banking over cloud tops, the Rockies beneath them jagged and unforgiving. Ray scanned the cockpit instruments, calculating angles, descent rates, wind patterns. The fire on Flight 927 was spreading, a streak of orange against the morning sky, black smoke curling like a snake. Inside the passenger cabin, families screamed, seatbelts locking their bodies in place, oxygen masks dangling unused. Ray imagined their terror. Each second wasted was a life at risk. A blip appeared on the radar, then another. Ray's brow furrowed. 2 F-22 fighter jets were closing in, supersonic streaks cutting through the clouds with military precision. Strange, why would they be scrambled for a civilian flight? Her fingers hovered over the radio. "Unidentified aircraft, this is Cargo One. State your intentions." The response was almost immediate, clipped and professional. "Cargo One, identify yourself. Confirm call sign." Ray froze for a heartbeat. Memories she had long buried surfaced. Flight simulators at Top Gun, code names like Maverick's Shadow, maneuvers tested to the edge of physics, and the weight of national expectations pressing down on her shoulders. She had left that world behind, chosen a quieter life hauling cargo, avoiding the headlines, the scrutiny, the danger. And yet here they were, the very jets she had once flown alongside and competed against, demanding identification that could reveal her hidden past. The wind buffeted the Hercules as Ray adjusted the throttles. Her pulse was steady, controlled, but inside, a storm of emotions churned. Fear for the 300 lives ahead, the creeping dread that her past might be exposed, the surge of adrenaline that had lain dormant for years, The radio crackled again. "Cargo 1, your response is required. Call sign confirmation." Ray's voice, calm yet resolute, cut through the cockpit. "Call sign Shadow." A pause, then the unmistakable sound of recognition in the F-22 wingman's comms. "Shadow, is that really you?" Ray's eyes narrowed. One of the pilots executed a perfect barrel roll, keeping pace with her massive Hercules with unnerving precision. She remembered the pilots' faces from years ago, competitors, friends, rivals, and now they were circling a burning airliner. Lives hung in the balance, and her secret identity was now a variable she couldn't ignore. She refocused, pushing aside the shock. Flight 927 was still unstable, spiraling slightly. Smoke trails indicated the fire might compromise the fuselage any second. Ray's mind worked in split-second calculations. Descent rate, relative positioning, wind gusts, turbulence over the mountains, the fragile alignment needed to guide them safely. Jamal muttered, voice trembling, "This is impossible." Ray didn't respond. Impossible was a word for others. For her, it was simply another challenge, one she had trained for in ways no one aboard Flight 927 could imagine. As the Hercules approached the stricken plane, the sun reflected off the orange flame streaking its side, casting eerie shadows over the terrified passengers. Ray inhaled, a deep, steadying breath. She could feel the aircraft's vibrations through her fingertips, the hum of the engines like a heartbeat in her veins. She glanced at Jamal, who looked ready to bolt, and nodded once. Silent communication. She had this. Then, a sudden jolt rocked the Hercules as turbulence from the descending passenger plane tossed her massive craft. The HUD flickered. Smoke from the burning engine of Flight 927 obscured parts of the sky. The F-22s executed rapid maneuvers around them, a protective formation that Ray barely noticed, her focus locked on the stricken plane. She could hear the passengers' screams faintly over the intercom chatter, but she tuned it out. Every skill she had ever learned, fighter pilot precision, cargo hauling control, instinctual timing, was now converging in this single, impossible moment. And then, as if the universe itself was testing her, a sudden alarm blared in the Hercules cockpit, a warning light she had never seen before, flickering red. She froze for a fraction of a second, eyes scanning, mind racing. The F-22 pilots on either side of her executed synchronized maneuvers, their presence both comforting and a reminder of how exposed they all were. She tightened her grip on the yoke. Lives were on the line. Secrets were at risk. And one wrong move now would mean catastrophe. Ray's jaw set. She swallowed hard and whispered to herself, "Let's save them." The Hercules dove into the turbulent sky, following the burning airliner, engines screaming, wind ripping past, as the first true test of her cargo pilot life, and her hidden past unfolded. The morning sky had transformed from serene blue to a roiling storm of smoke and fire. Flight 927, a civilian passenger plane carrying 300 souls, groaned as its left engine belched black smoke that curled and twisted like a living creature. Inside the cockpit, Captain Ray Walker's eyes were razor-sharp, her fingers gripping the yoke as if it were an extension of her own body. The roar of the Hercules engines battled the chaotic wind, and turbulence from the burning plane sent a violent shake through her aircraft. Every second that passed increased the danger, but Ray's mind was calm, calculated. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with 300 lives at stake. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Jamal Reed, hunched over his console, muttering to himself as he tried to adjust altitude and speed. "They're losing lift, headings erratic. We're catching them too fast," he said, voice trembling. Ray didn't respond. Words were distractions. Every thought, every calculation had to translate into action. She matched the Hercules' descent to Flight 927's instability, a delicate dance of physics and instinct. Years of fighter jet training, of high-speed maneuvers in Top Gun simulations, now guided her massive cargo plane like a scalpel. The F-22s were circling, two deadly streaks of gray and black supersonic predators in formation. Their presence was both comforting and unsettling. The comms crackled again, the voices clipped, professional but tinged with disbelief. Cargo 1, maintain your trajectory. We're monitoring. Status update. Ray's jaw tightened. Every second she spent explaining herself was a second the passengers could die. She keyed the radio. Shadow, she replied curtly. Silence followed for a heartbeat, then recognition. The pilot's formation tightened, weaving around her, a protective barrier slicing through the wind. Inside Flight 927, passengers were unaware of the high-stakes aerial ballet unfolding above them. They screamed, gripped their seats, and prayed. Smoke drifted through the cabin, acrid and thick, and oxygen masks dangled, unused or poorly fitted. Mothers clutched children, elderly passengers huddled in fear. The emergency lights flickered as turbulence tossed the plane. Ray could imagine it all, each life, each panic-stricken expression, in vivid detail. She drew on every ounce of experience she had, navigating fighter jets through storms, improvising in crises, understanding panic in high-stakes situations. Her mission was no longer cargo delivery, it was pure rescue. The first major obstacle appeared in the form of a sudden wind shear over the Rockies. Ray felt the Hercules jolt violently, instruments screeching warnings as the airliner below was slammed sideways. She corrected instantly, banking hard, banking too hard, and felt the strain through the fuselage. Jamal's voice broke through the roar. "We're too close. We'll collide if this keeps up." Ray's eyes didn't leave the HUD. "Trust me," she said, though the words were more for herself than him. A flicker of doubt entered her mind for a split second. Could a massive C-130 really maneuver with the agility required to stabilize a burning airliner? But instinct kicked in. She visualized the trajectory, calculated the wind vectors, the lift coefficient of Flight 927, and the precise angles her plane needed to maintain. Slowly, impossibly, she nudged the Hercules into position, wingtip aligned just right to avoid turbulence while maintaining close proximity. The F-22s mirrored her movements, their sleek forms slicing past with surgical precision. The lead fighter pilot, Lieutenant Commander Ethan Hawk Mills, spoke over the comms. "You've still got it, Shadow. Keep them stable, we're giving you a corridor." Ray's lips twitched into the barest hint of a smile, but her focus never wavered. They weren't there to save her. They were there to observe, to cover, to act if she failed. But failure wasn't an option. Below them, Flight 927 groaned and shuddered, the fuselage buckling under heat and smoke. Ray's mind ran simulations in real time: engine failure probability, lift distribution, emergency descent trajectory. Jamal's hands shook as he tried to monitor communications with air traffic control. Ray leaned over briefly to reassure him. "We keep them stable, we keep them alive. We don't panic." The co-pilot nodded, swallowing hard, trusting her implicitly. Then a second alarm screamed in the Hercules cockpit. The hydraulic system, stressed beyond capacity by turbulence and the close maneuvering, gave a warning. Ray's pulse spiked. This wasn't just about saving Flight 927 anymore. Her own plane could fail under the strain. She didn't have time to hesitate. Every calculation, every instinct, every split-second decision had to converge perfectly. She adjusted the flaps, redistributed cargo weight mentally, and nudged the plane in a precise arc to compensate. The Hercules shuddered but held. Meanwhile, the F-22s executed protective sweeps, blowing turbulent air away from the burning airliner and creating a controlled path through the mountains. One of the pilots, Hawk, spoke again. "Shadow, we're holding the corridor. You guide them home." Ray's fingers flew over the yoke, micro-adjustments with a dancer's precision. Smoke streaked across Flight 927's fuselage as passengers screamed and prayed. Ray could hear it all faintly over the radio chatter, a chorus of fear and desperation. Every life was a responsibility, every breath a test of nerve. Suddenly, a mechanical groan echoed from Flight 927's left engine. Flames licked the fuselage with new ferocity, and the plane began a slight downward pitch. Ray's heart raced, but her face remained calm. She keyed the radio. "Stay with me. We're not losing anyone today." Jamal's eyes widened as he watched her line up the C-130 for a maneuver that would have been considered reckless under normal circumstances. She was about to place her plane in a position to literally catch, or stabilize a burning airliner mid-flight. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds felt like minutes. Ray's mind ran through every contingency. What if the engine failed completely? What if the fuselage buckled further? What if the wind shear pitched them both into the mountains? Yet, with every doubt, another surge of focus strengthened her. She visualized Flight 927's descent, her plane's lift, the optimal angle, the precise adjustment of every control surface. The first passengers inside Flight 927 screamed louder as their descent steadied slightly. Mothers clutched children, unaware that a cargo pilot who had once been Top Gun was guiding their lives with split-second precision. Ray glanced to her left at the F-22 formation. Hawk and his wingman executed synchronized maneuvers, signaling approval, giving her subtle guidance. She felt a fleeting surge of recognition. The world she had left behind had just re-entered, but this time it wasn't about combat. It was about saving lives. And just as she began the delicate alignment for the next phase of the rescue, a shadow passed over the cockpit, a reminder of the unforgiving mountains beneath. Ray's stomach tightened. One wrong move now would send both aircraft into chaos. Sweat stung her eyes as she whispered to herself, "Steady, steady. You've done this before. You can do it again." The chaos was far from over. Flames, smoke, turbulence, and fear all converged, creating a storm that would test every ounce of her skill, nerve, and courage. And as Ray prepared for the first maneuver that could stabilize the burning plane, a sudden, unexpected alarm sounded in the Hercules cockpit, something she had never seen before. Her fingers froze mid-adjustment. The plane shuddered violently, and the passengers below were still screaming, oblivious to the storm above. Ray's eyes met Jamal's, wide with fear. She clenched her jaw. The first step towards saving 300 lives had begun, but the hardest, most dangerous work was still ahead. The F-22s roared overhead, circling, watching, ready to act. Ray whispered under her breath, "Let's bring them home." The roar of engines, the shriek of wind, and the smell of burning fuel created a sensory storm inside the Hercules cockpit. Captain Ray Shadow Walker's jaw was set, eyes narrowed, but her mind was working faster than it had in years. Each calculation, trajectory, lift, wind resistance, was executed in real time, a ballet of physics and instinct. The burning airliner, Flight 927, teetered dangerously below, and every second wasted could mean disaster. Lieutenant Jamal Reed's hands were trembling on the controls. "Captain, I don't think we can keep up," he stammered, voice barely audible over the roar. Ray didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the burning fuselage, noting the growing flames, the twisting fuselage, and the panicked passengers inside. Years of fighter training surged forward, every maneuver she had mastered in Top Gun simulations, every emergency drill, every high-G turn. Cargo flying was supposed to be predictable. This was anything but. Then the comms crackled, sharp and insistent. "Shadow, call sign confirmation, repeat." Ray's chest tightened. Recognition had already passed over the F-22 formation, and now it was official. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Hawk Mills, the pilot who had once outmaneuvered her in Top Gun exercises, spoke through the radio. His voice was tinged with disbelief. "Shadow, is that really you?" Memories she had buried for nearly a decade surfaced in a rush. Dogfights over the Pacific, simulations that pushed aircraft and pilots to the edge, and nights spent in strategy rooms arguing about tactics with some of the best aviators in the Navy. She had left that world behind, choosing the quiet anonymity of cargo flights. She had wanted no headlines, no accolades, no expectation to save lives in high-speed, high-stakes scenarios. And yet here she was, hovering above a burning airliner with 300 lives at stake, and the Navy's finest jets circling like predators. "Shadow, we're going to hold the corridor for you," Hawk continued. "Keep them stable, we've got your six." The subtle compliment the trust implied reminded Ray why she had earned the call sign years ago. She exhaled, shaking off a flicker of doubt. The F-22 pilots weren't here to judge. They were here to assist, to cover, and if necessary, to rescue her if things went sideways. Her fingers flew over the yoke as she adjusted the Hercules' flight path, lining up with Flight 927 in a precarious parallel position. The burning plane was tilting slightly, the fuselage twisted under the heat and structural stress. Flames licked along the wing, smoke curling into thick black plumes that could obscure visibility at any moment. Inside the cabin, passengers screamed, unaware of the precise maneuvers being executed above to save their lives. Ray's eyes flicked to the HUD, her mind calculating lift coefficients, wind vectors, and fuel ratios in real time. "Hold steady," she muttered, almost as a mantra. "Hold steady." Jamal's hands moved shakily over his instruments, but Ray's presence was grounding. "I've got this," she added, though internally, every second was a calculated risk. The Hercules groaned as it compensated for the turbulence generated by the burning airliner. The margin for error was microscopic. One miscalculation could mean collision or structural failure for both planes. Hawk's voice cut in again, clipped and precise. "Shadow, they're losing more lift on the left wing. Adjust altitude by 10 degrees and increase thrust by 5%. Keep the corridor steady." Ray processed it instantly. The F-22s weren't just observing, they were guiding her, their experience complementing her own. Yet this was her operation, her rescue. She could feel the adrenaline, the familiar rush that had driven her in dogfights, now repurposed to save lives rather than take them. The next few moments became a blur. The Hercules shifted, tilted, and aligned alongside Flight 927 with impossible precision. Smoke billowed past her cockpit, hot and acrid, and the roar of the F-22s created a hurricane of turbulence that pushed the C-130 to its limits. Ray adjusted the flaps, throttled engines, and subtly redistributed cargo weight. She felt every vibration, every subtle movement of her aircraft, as if the plane were an extension of her body. Jamal watched, wide-eyed, as the impossible unfolded before him. Then the unexpected happened. Flight 927 lurched violently to the left as part of the fuselage weakened. The engine fire flared, sparks shooting into the sky. Ray's stomach twisted. She had anticipated turbulence, wind shear, and smoke, but not a sudden shift of this magnitude. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the focus that sharpened every instinct. Every split-second decision now carried monumental weight. Ray tilted the Hercules slightly, countering the downward spiral of Flight 927, using the massive plane's lift to stabilize the smaller aircraft. She could feel the strain on the hydraulics, the pressure on the airframe, the screaming wind. Yet despite the mechanical stress, she held the trajectory. Her voice over the radio was calm, precise. "Flight 927, maintain control. We've got you. Hold steady. You're going to make it." The F-22s mirrored her movements, creating a protective barrier that pushed turbulent air away and minimized risk. Hawk executed a barrel roll to the other side, signaling approval. Ray's pulse raced as she realized the magnitude of the moment. She was coordinating an aerial ballet involving 3 planes, each in mortal danger, every life dependent on the smallest micro-adjustments. The world outside the cockpit had disappeared. There was only her co-pilot, the burning plane, and the elite jets circling in trust and anticipation. Inside Flight 927, passengers gripped seats, prayed, and screamed. Ray imagined the mother clutching her child, the elderly man praying silently, the young couple holding hands with white-knuckled desperation. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, yet she drew strength from it. Every maneuver, every tilt of the yoke, every adjustment of thrust was about them, about keeping them alive. Then another warning light flashed, this time in the Hercules systems, indicating hydraulic stress beyond recommended limits. Ray's hands didn't falter. This wasn't a simulation. This was reality, every second a test of nerve, skill, and resolve. "Keep them steady," she muttered, almost to herself. The F-22s circled closer, engines roaring like guardians. Hawk's voice cut in one final time. "Shadow, corridor secure. We've got your 6. Make your move." Her mind cleared, focus sharpened to an almost painful clarity. This was her moment. The convergence of cargo pilot skill, fighter-pilot instinct and human determination. The impossible task of stabilizing a burning passenger plane mid-flight was about to begin. Every calculation, every instinct, every ounce of courage she possessed coalesced into one single objective: save 300 lives. Ray exhaled slowly, bracing for the maneuver that would define everything. The airliner lurched again, flames streaking its fuselage. Jamal's eyes met hers, fear and awe mixed in their reflection. She nodded once. "Let's bring them home," she said softly. The Hercules surged forward, engines screaming, flaps and ailerons adjusting in perfect harmony. The F-22s tightened their formation, providing guidance and protection. Flight 927 stabilized slightly in response to Ray's subtle yet precise adjustments. Smoke billowed around them, wind shrieked past, but the delicate balance held. In that suspended moment, the ghosts of Top Gun, the quiet years as a cargo pilot, the faces of terrified passengers, all collided. Ray was no longer Shadow or merely a cargo pilot. She was the sum of every experience, every risk, every impossible maneuver she had ever attempted. And the world, unknown to the families inside Flight 927, was watching as history prepared to unfold in the skies above the Rockies. The next phase of the rescue loomed, a phase that would test the limits of both aircraft, the pilots, and human courage itself. Ray tightened her grip, her eyes locking on the burning plane below, her mind focused entirely on the task at hand. One misstep now, 1 second too late, could cost everything. And then, without warning, Flight 927 jolted violently once more, sparks flying from its weakened engine. Ray's heart skipped. This was it. The true test had begun. The roar of the Hercules engines was deafening in the cockpit, but Captain Ray's Shadow, Walker, tuned it out, hearing only the rhythm of Flight 927's labored descent. The burning airliner lurched and shuddered below, flames licking the fuselage and trailing smoke that twisted violently in the morning sky. Every second mattered. Every motion of her massive cargo plane had to be precise, or the lives of 300 people would be lost in an instant. Lieutenant Jamal Reed's knuckles were white as he monitored instruments, reading turbulence, lift, and trajectory data, but Ray didn't speak. Communication now was minimal. Too much chatter would distract them. Instead, she relied on instinct, her mind running countless simulations in real time. She had left fighter aviation behind years ago, but the muscle memory, the split-second decision-making, and the relentless focus that defined her Top Gun days surged back. This was no longer cargo delivery. This was a rescue that defied physics. The F-22s circled above and to the sides, engines roaring, their sleek bodies slicing through the sky. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Hawk Mills was hovering nearby, a ghost from her past, yet entirely present in this critical moment. "Shadow," his voice came over the comms, calm but urgent, "the airliner's lift is failing. You've got a 10-degree tilt to correct. Engage now, we're clear." Ray adjusted her flaps subtly, banking the Hercules to match Flight 927's tilt, her massive plane dancing in perfect synchronization with the smaller, damaged craft. Inside Flight 927, chaos raged. Passengers screamed, buckled into their seats, clutching children, spouses, and strangers alike. The smoke was thick, acrid, and the flames cast eerie orange shadows across terrified faces. Ray could almost feel their fear, a heavy, suffocating weight pressing into her chest. She inhaled sharply and exhaled, letting the focus she had honed through years of fighter training center her. Panic was a contagion and she couldn't let it spread. Not now. The first major maneuver began. Ray nudged the Hercules closer, matching the lateral drift of Flight 927 with millimeter precision. She adjusted throttle and flaps, redistributing cargo weight subtly to maintain balance. The C-130 groaned under the strain, wings flexing as if protesting the impossible demands placed upon it. Sparks of hydraulic stress flickered on the warning panel, but Ray ignored them. She could feel the metal flexing beneath her hands. Failure was not an option. Hawk's voice cut in again. Shadow, you're within 3 meters on the left wing. Maintain angle, adjust for wind gusts. Corridor stable. Ray's heart pounded. 3 meters. The margin for error was microscopic. One miscalculation, one gust of wind, one twitch too many, and both aircraft could spiral into catastrophe. Yet the same thrill she had felt in dogfights surged through her veins. This was danger on a scale that most pilots never faced, and it was hers to command. Jamal's voice broke through her concentration. "Captain, the left engine's reading critical. The fuselage stress, if we push closer, it could." Ray held up a hand. She had heard the calculations, the warnings, the probabilities. None of them mattered. There was only action, precision, and timing. She guided the Hercules with subtle but decisive movements, tilting, banking, and accelerating in harmony with Flight 927. The first near-catastrophic moment hit suddenly. Flight 927 jolted violently, sparks flying from the engine, flames flaring higher. The airliner pitched slightly downward, and Ray had less than 2 seconds to react. She adjusted the Hercules' altitude and angle with surgical precision, nudging it just enough to stabilize the burning plane without contact. The F-22s executed protective sweeps, pushing turbulence away and creating a temporary corridor of smoother air. Ray exhaled, but only briefly. There was no time to relax. The second phase of the maneuver demanded even closer alignment. She calculated the trajectory down to centimeters, matching Flight 927's speed and angle almost perfectly. The Hercules shuddered violently, strain warnings blinking in red across the console. Jamal gritted his teeth as he monitored structural integrity, but Ray's focus was absolute. Every micro-adjustment, every minute tilt of the yoke was a potential lifesaver. Inside Flight 927, passengers screamed louder as the plane leveled slightly. Mothers clutched children, old men whispered prayers, and young couples gripped hands so tightly that knuckles turned white. They had no idea who their guardian angel was above them, steering the massive cargo plane with such precision that their lives were hanging by a thread. Ray imagined their faces, their fear, their hope, and it strengthened her resolve. Another jolt shook both planes. Flames spiked higher on Flight 927's wing. Ray made a split-second decision. She would align her Hercules slightly ahead of the airliner, using the airflow from her engines to create lift that would stabilize the burning plane. The risk was immense. Too close, and a collision could destroy them both. Too far, and the turbulence would send Flight 927 spiraling. She nudged forward, feeling the stress in the aircraft's wings, feeling every vibration, every micro-shift. Hawk's voice broke through. "Shadow, corridor secure. You're clear to stabilize. We're giving you a steady path." Ray's pulse surged. This was it, the moment of convergence between her cargo pilot skills and the fighter pilot instincts she thought she had buried. She tilted, adjusted throttle, and pressed the Hercules into position, creating a lift corridor that began to level the burning plane. The Hercules groaned under the strain. Sparks flickered from overworked hydraulics. Ray's fingers ached, her knuckles white, her mind a razor-sharp focus of calculations and instinct. Jamal shouted warnings, but Ray barely registered them. She was in the zone, a rare, almost surreal state where time seemed to slow, every microsecond expanding to allow perfect control. Slowly, astonishingly, Flight 927's trajectory began to stabilize. The pitch leveled, the roll corrected, the burning fuselage holding together just enough. Passengers screamed, but the downward spiral had stopped. Ray's eyes flicked to the HUD. The alignment was nearly perfect. She adjusted again, nudging millimeters, matching every twitch, every sway. The F-22s flanked them, engines roaring, guarding, guiding, ready to intervene. Inside the burning airliner, families didn't know who had saved them, but a strange sense of temporary relief washed over some passengers as the violent jerking subsided. Ray could feel it, the fragile balance between disaster and survival. Every second now was a test of endurance, of nerve, of skill. Then, without warning, Flight 927's fuselage groaned ominously. Sparks erupted from the engine, smoke thickened, and the plane pitched slightly again. Ray's stomach twisted, but she didn't hesitate. She adjusted her plane's angle, used her massive aircraft to create lift, and slowly countered the downward pull. Jamal's voice was tense. "Captain, we're at maximum structural stress." Ray exhaled slowly, ignoring the warnings. Maximum stress was the new normal. The F-22s executed rapid maneuvers to shield both aircraft from wind gusts, flanking the corridor as if guiding two delicate dancers through a storm. Ray's hands moved in perfect synchronization with the turbulent forces acting on the planes. Each adjustment was precise, deliberate, almost impossible. Sweat streamed down her forehead, her jaw a tight line. She could feel the strain, the fear, the responsibility, but also the thrill, the clarity that came from absolute focus. As the first major stabilization maneuver succeeded, Ray allowed herself a brief internal acknowledgement. Flight 927 wasn't out of danger, but for the first time in what felt like eternity, it wasn't falling uncontrollably. The passengers were still in peril, but the trajectory was manageable. Ray's hands relaxed slightly on the yoke, her mind already calculating the next steps. The F-22s signaled approval, forming a tighter perimeter, their jet wash stabilizing the air around the burning plane. Ray glanced at Hawk's lead F-22, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This was no longer just about cargo, no longer about hiding in anonymity. She was back in the zone she thought she had abandoned, a top pilot in control of life, death, and fate, her past skills converging with her present purpose. And then a new challenge emerged. A sudden cloud of smoke from the burning engine obscured Flight 927 entirely. Ray's pulse spiked. She could no longer see the fuselage directly. She had to rely entirely on instruments, instincts, and the guidance of the F-22s. One wrong move now, one miscalculation, and all their lives could be lost. Ray exhaled, her mind sharpening to a razor's edge. "Hold steady, we're not done yet," she whispered, voice barely audible over the roar. The next phase, the daring approach that would bring Flight 927 fully under control, was about to begin. Every second was a knife edge between disaster and survival, and Ray Walker, former Top Gun, now cargo pilot extraordinaire, was ready to dance on it. The Hercules shuddered violently as Captain Ray "Shadow" Walker pushed the massive aircraft to its limits. Below, Flight 927 groaned under the stress of a burning engine, smoke curling like black snakes from the fuselage. Each microsecond was critical. One miscalculation, one wrong adjustment, and hundreds of lives could vanish in an instant. Ray's knuckles whitened on the yoke. She ignored the alarms screaming in the cockpit. They were nothing compared to the real warning outside. The lives of 300 people suspended in the sky. Lieutenant Jamal Reed's eyes darted between instruments, his breath shallow. "Captain, we're at maximum hydraulic load," he warned. Ray's jaw tightened. She had anticipated structural stress, turbulence, even complete engine failure, but now the Hercules groaned audibly as if protesting the impossible demands placed upon it. She exhaled, steadying herself. "We keep them steady," she said. Her voice was calm, resolute, a tether to reality, a lifeline to her co-pilot, to herself. Above and around them, the F-22s executed their roles with precise synchronicity. Lieutenant Commander Ethan "Hawk" Mills led the formation, banking sharply, engines screaming, creating protective corridors and slicing the turbulent air into manageable currents. Their presence wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. Ray could feel their trust and their expectations, and it fueled her. They weren't merely observers, they were partners, guardians of the fragile line between life and death. The first critical adjustment had succeeded. Flight 927, though battered, had leveled slightly, its pitch controlled by the airflow generated by the Hercules. Passengers screamed, cried, and clung to one another, but the uncontrollable downward spiral had ceased. Ray's eyes flicked to the HUD. Perfect alignment wasn't possible, but the trajectory was manageable. She allowed herself a fraction of relief, only to be jolted immediately back into crisis as sparks erupted from the burning engine, flames shooting higher. "Captain, the fuselage is twisting further," Jamal shouted, voice tight with fear. Ray's mind raced. She visualized the airliner's angle, the shifting weight, the force of gravity against its weakened wings. Using the C-130's massive size, she nudged forward and tilted subtly, redirecting airflow to create lift that would counter the airliner's instability. The Hercules groaned, metal straining under the effort, but it held. Every decision was a knife edge between control and catastrophe. Inside Flight 927, chaos reigned. Children screamed, elderly passengers gasped, and mothers clutched their children tightly. The oxygen masks dangled unused, forgotten in the surge of fear. Ray imagined each of them, their terror a palpable weight pressing down on her chest. She drew strength from it, from the responsibility, from the knowledge that her skill could hold them in life's balance. Every adjustment of the yoke, every fraction of a throttle increase was for them. Hawk's voice came over the comms, steady and commanding. Shadow, corridor secure. Adjust angle 5 degrees to compensate for turbulence ahead. Ray executed the maneuver with precision, banking the Hercules just enough to stabilize Flight 927. The F-22s mirrored her every motion, engines roaring, a coordinated dance of jets and cargo plane. She felt the pulse of the sky, the vibration of the engines, the rhythm of life and death in her hands. Then came the next challenge. Flight 927's left wing trembled, sparks flying as structural stress threatened to tear it apart. Ray's stomach tightened. She had to act quickly, using her plane's massive size and controlled thrust to stabilize the wing's lift. Jamal's voice cracked over the comms. "Captain, if we do this, the Hercules could." Ray silenced him with a sharp look. Time for caution had passed. This was improvisation, precision, and courage fused into action. The Hercules shifted forward slightly, nudging the damaged plane into a safer airflow. The airliner responded, its trajectory stabilizing fractionally. Passengers screamed, then gasped as the violent pitching subsided. Ray's heart pounded. This was a miracle in motion. Every adjustment, every calculation, every risk taken in these critical moments had begun to pay off. The impossible was happening. They were holding Flight 927 in the air. But the danger was far from over. Flames from the burning engine were spreading along the fuselage, smoke thickening to the point of obscuring visibility. Ray had to rely entirely on instruments, HUD readings, and the F-22 pilot's guidance. Hawk's voice remained a lifeline. "Shadow, follow our lead. Corridor clear, keep alignment tight." Ray's fingers moved in perfect harmony with the plane's vibrations, a dance of instinct and experience honed over years in Top Gun. Jamal watched, awestruck, as Ray guided the Hercules with such precision that Flight 927's movement was controlled, almost serene despite the chaos. I've never seen anything like this," he murmured. Ray allowed herself no satisfaction yet. There was no room for it. Lives were still in peril. The final stabilization and descent were still ahead, and every second counted. The F-22s created a corridor of smoother airflow, mitigating turbulence and protecting the planes from sudden gusts. Ray adjusted thrust, flaps, and pitch with millimeter precision, her mind calculating lift, drag, and air density in real time. Sparks from Flight 927's engine illuminated the cockpit like fireworks, casting eerie shadows on Ray's determined face. She was the calm at the center of a storm, the pivot around which life and death spun. Then another jolt shook both planes. Flight 927's fuselage twisted slightly, a violent reminder that the structural integrity of the airliner was failing. Ray's pulse surged, but she responded instantly, countering the motion with subtle yet decisive adjustments. The Hercules groaned under the strain, metal complaining, hydraulics warning of overload, but Ray's hands moved with unwavering precision. This was no longer just a maneuver. It was a test of courage, skill, and nerve at the very edge of possibility. The passengers inside Flight 927 screamed, prayed, and gripped their seats, unaware of the aerial ballet happening above them. Ray imagined their fear, their hope, their fragile trust in unseen hands guiding them through chaos. She drew strength from it, from the knowledge that every calculation, every microadjustment, every second of concentration could save lives. And slowly, imperceptibly, the airliner's descent stabilized further. Hawk's voice broke through, firm but encouraging. "Shadow, you've got them. Keep steady, we've got your six." Ray exhaled a fraction, eyes scanning instruments. Flight 927's pitch was stable, its trajectory aligned with the safe descent path she had calculated. The first phase of the rescue, stabilization in midair, was complete. Hundreds of lives were no longer on the edge of death. But as the Hercules engines roared and the F-22s flanked them, Ray knew the most dangerous part was still ahead. Guiding Flight 927 toward the nearest airstrip, managing an unstable fuselage, and navigating a mountainous terrain in a fragile, burning plane. Every second, every maneuver would be critical. The miracle was underway, but the story was far from over. Ray glanced at Jamal, his face pale but resolute. "We're not done," she said softly. "Not yet. Keep your focus. Every life is still ours to save." He nodded, swallowing hard. Outside, the F-22s maintained their formation, engines slicing the wind, guardians ready for the final act. The Hercules groaned under maximum stress, but Ray's resolve was absolute. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel a spark of hope. Flight 927 was not falling. Flight 927 was alive, and the hands guiding it, hers, were steady. And yet the danger wasn't over. Sparks from the engine flared higher, smoke thickened, and visibility was beginning to drop. Ray exhaled slowly, preparing for the next phase, the approach toward the airstrip that could save all 300 lives. The stakes had never been higher, the pressure never more intense, and the world outside, unseen, unaware, was about to witness a miracle in motion. Ray whispered under her breath, "Let's bring them home." Rockies loomed beneath them, jagged and unforgiving, casting long shadows across the thickening smoke. Captain Ray's shadow, Walker's eyes were locked on the HUD, fingers gripping the yoke with white-knuckled intensity. Flight 927 was stable, for now, but the ground was coming fast, and every second brought them closer to catastrophe. Hundreds of lives depended on her ability to navigate treacherous terrain with a burning, structurally compromised airliner. Lieutenant Jamal Reed monitored the instruments, his voice tight with tension. "Captain, speeds climbing, altitudes dropping faster than expected. We're approaching the tree line." Ray didn't flinch. Speed and altitude weren't problems, they were variables. Variables she had spent years mastering during fighter maneuvers. "Adjust angle by 3 degrees, she said, her voice calm, even as adrenaline surged. "Throttle back slightly, keep lift steady." The F-22s flanked them on either side, slicing through turbulent currents with precision. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Hawk Mills, the lead jet pilot, spoke over the comms. "Shadow, we're holding corridor. Wind gusts coming up, terrain clearance tight. Stay sharp." Ray inhaled, feeling the familiar thrill of danger that had defined her Top Gun days. Except now, the stakes were not trophies or medals, they were human lives. The Hercules groaned under the strain, every control adjustment creating micro-tremors that reverberated through the fuselage. The cargo plane was at its maximum operational limit, yet Ray maneuvered it with surgical precision. She nudged forward, tilted slightly, and redirected airflow toward Flight 927, which shuddered under its own structural stress. Sparks flew from the damaged engine, flames licking higher, smoke curling in thick, choking plumes. Inside Flight 927, passengers screamed, clinging to seats, to loved ones, to any shred of hope. Oxygen masks dangled unused. Ray imagined their faces, their fear, their prayers, and she drew strength from it. This was no longer about calculation alone. It was about courage, intuition, and absolute focus. She adjusted thrust, flaps, and pitch, feeling the subtle resistance of both planes and the turbulent sky around them. Jamal's voice trembled. "Captain, the fuselage is twisting again. Maximum stress. If we keep this up..." Ray cut him off with a sharp glance. Time for doubt had passed. The risk was total, but hesitation was death. "We keep going, keep them steady. We're not letting anyone die today," she said, voice steady, eyes focused. The F-22s executed protective maneuvers, pushing turbulent air away from the corridor. Hawk's voice crackled over the comms. Shadow, slight roll to the left, gust ahead, corridor clear. Ray banked the Hercules, a subtle but critical adjustment. Flight 927 followed the airflow, tilting, shuddering but maintaining stability. The mountain ridges were closer now, jagged rocks threatening to rip through wings if they miscalculated by a fraction. A sudden downdraft hit them, violently shaking both planes. Ray's heart raced. The F-22s countered, slicing through the turbulent currents, but the Hercules trembled under maximum stress. Sparks from the instrument panel flickered, warning lights screaming hydraulic strain. Jamal clutched the console, wide-eyed. "Captain, if we do this." Ray didn't respond verbally. Her hands moved in precise synchronization with the plane, each micro-adjustment a calculation that balanced physics, instinct, and courage. The first mountain pass approached. Ray's eyes narrowed as she calculated the trajectory. Trees rose beneath them like teeth, cliffs loomed on either side, and Flight 927's burning engine threatened to throw them into chaos. She whispered under her breath, "Steady, steady, hold it together." The Hercules tilted, redirected airflow, nudged Flight 927 into alignment with the safest path, and for a brief moment, the planes moved as one. Hawk's voice was calm but firm. "Shadow, corridor holding, keep angle steady, reduce pitch slightly." Ray complied, adjusting by mere centimeters, feeling the strain in the aircraft, feeling the sweat on her brow, the adrenaline in her veins. Every motion had consequences. One misstep, one miscalculation, and they could tumble into the mountainside. Below them, Flight 927 shuddered violently again. The fuselage groaned, metal flexing under stress. Sparks flew higher, flames licking the wings. Ray's mind raced through emergency procedures, structural limits, and aerodynamic calculations simultaneously. The lives of 300 people hung in the balance, and her actions would determine whether they survived. She nudged the Hercules slightly ahead, creating airflow to stabilize the burning plane, then adjusted thrust to maintain lift. The passengers inside Flight 927 screamed louder, clinging to the few seconds of fragile hope Ray had created. Mothers hugged children, elderly passengers whispered prayers, young couples clutched hands so tightly their knuckles whitened. Ray imagined them all, their terror and hope fueling her precision, guiding every movement, every tilt, every thrust adjustment. Then a new challenge emerged. Flames from Flight 927's engine flared higher, smoke thickened, and visibility dropped. Ray had to rely entirely on instruments and the guidance of the F-22s. Hawk's voice cut through. "Shadow, corridor clear. We've got visual. Follow our lead." Ray adjusted her trajectory, banking slightly, nudging the Hercules into the perfect alignment to keep Flight 927 on a stable path. The mountain pass loomed closer, its jagged peaks a constant threat. Ray's eyes darted between HUD readings, instruments, and the airliner's position. The F-22s executed protective sweeps, their engines roaring, slicing turbulent air, guiding both planes. Every microsecond mattered. One misjudgment, one misaligned adjustment, and both planes could collide with the mountainside. Jamal's voice trembled. "Captain, we're pushing structural limits." "The fuselage," Ray cut him off with a glance. She didn't need warnings. She had lived for moments like this. Every calculation, every instinct, every Top Gun maneuver she had learned years ago converged now in a single, critical objective: save lives. The Hercules tilted slightly, nudging Flight 927 into a safer airflow, reducing pitch and stabilizing descent. Sparks erupted from the damaged engine, but the trajectory held. Passengers gasped as the violent pitching subsided, the downward spiral slowed, and the airliner held level. Ray's pulse surged. The miracle was underway, but the final approach was still ahead. The nearest airstrip was visible now, a strip of asphalt surrounded by rugged mountains, the only lifeline for the passengers. Ray exhaled slowly, her eyes scanning the terrain, calculating angles, lift, speed, and wind. She whispered to Jamal, "We're almost there. Stay sharp. One wrong move and it's over." Flight 927 shuddered violently again as turbulence hit. Ray nudged forward, adjusted angle, and used the Hercules airflow to stabilize the burning plane. The F-22s flanked them tightly, engines roaring, a protective barrier guiding them toward safety. And then, as the Hercules and Flight 927 approached the airstrip, a moment of pure, breathtaking tension arrived. Flames from the airliner's engine flared higher, smoke obscured part of the runway, and the wind currents threatened to push them off course. Ray's jaw set, eyes locked on the target, hands moving with impossible precision. "Hold steady," she whispered, voice barely audible. "We're bringing them home." The mountain pass closed in, the runway approaching, and the next maneuver, touchdown, landing, survival, was about to begin. The stakes had never been higher, the pressure never more intense, and the world above and below awaited the outcome of a miracle in motion. The airstrip loomed ahead, a thin line of asphalt framed by jagged mountains. Captain Ray Shadow Walker's eyes were locked on it, her hands gripping the yoke as if the lives of everyone on Flight 927 and herself depended on it, which of course they did. Flames from the damaged engine of Flight 927 flared higher, smoke curling thickly across the sky, obscuring her view. She couldn't rely on visuals alone. She had to trust instruments, instincts, and the guidance of the F-22s. Lieutenant Jamal Reed's hands shook as he monitored instruments. "Captain, the fuselage is at maximum stress. The left engine, if we push this," Ray cut him off with a sharp glance. She didn't need reassurance. Hesitation now would mean catastrophe. "Focus," she said quietly. "We can do this. We will do this." The words were as much a promise to herself as to Jamal, a mantra against panic. Hawk's voice crackled over the comms. "Shadow, corridor secure. Wind gusts unpredictable, smoke obscuring the runway. You've got the skill, just keep them aligned. We're with you." The F-22s flanked the Hercules, slicing through turbulent air, creating pockets of more stable airflow for Flight 927. Ray exhaled slowly, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline she had known during high-G dogfights. Only now the stakes were far higher. This wasn't a competition. This was survival. The Hercules groaned under maximum stress as Ray nudged it closer to the airliner. Every adjustment, throttle, pitch, flap, rudder, had to be precise. Flight 927 shuddered violently under the strain, sparks erupting from its burning engine, flames licking along its fuselage. Inside, passengers screamed, prayed, and clung to one another, unaware of the miracle taking place above them. Ray imagined each face, each panic-stricken expression, and drew focus and determination from it. The mountain pass was behind them, but the approach to the runway presented a new peril. Uneven terrain, smoke obscuring visibility, and a compromised engine threatening to fail entirely. Ray's eyes darted between instruments, HUD, and the distant runway. Jamal monitored airspeed, lift, and hydraulic warnings. "Captain, we're maxed out. Structural stress." Ray shook her head. Maxed out was a warning, not a limit. Courage, skill, and timing would carry them further than the instruments suggested. She nudged forward, adjusting the Hercules angle to create lift that would stabilize Flight 927's descent. The massive plane groaned under the strain. Sparks flickered across warning panels. Hydraulic alarms screamed, but Ray's hands were steady. Every microsecond, every subtle tilt, kept Flight 927 from spinning into chaos. The F-22s maintained formation, guiding, protecting, slicing turbulent currents. It was a precise ballet between three aircraft, orchestrated by a pilot whose instincts and skill were unmatched. The runway grew larger in the HUD, but the smoke obscured its edges. Ray's pulse raced. One misalignment now, one gust of wind, one flicker of mechanical failure, and hundreds of lives could vanish. "Throttle steady," she muttered to herself, nudging the plane with surgical precision. Flight 927 responded. Its descent slowed, stabilized just enough for the next critical maneuver, landing. Hawk's voice cut in sharply. "Shadow, line them up with the center. Adjust altitude 3 degrees. Corridor tight." Ray executed the maneuver flawlessly, banking slightly, nudging forward and maintaining the perfect distance. The Hercules created a cushion of airflow for Flight 927, counteracting turbulence and the shifting center of gravity. Sparks and smoke continued to rise from the burning plane, but for the first time, it moved predictably toward the runway. Jamal's voice trembled. "Captain, you're actually doing it." Ray didn't answer. There was no room for emotion, only action. She nudged the yoke slightly, adjusted throttle, and felt the weight of Flight 927 respond, shuddering but holding. Below, the jagged terrain passed in a blur. Every second was a test of nerves, precision, and courage. The impossible was unfolding before her. Then disaster nearly struck. Flight 927's fuselage twisted violently, sparks and flames erupting from the compromised engine. The plane pitched dangerously to the left, heading for the tree line at a deadly angle. Ray reacted instantly, banking the Hercules sharply, nudging forward and redirecting airflow to counter the tilt. The C-130 groaned, metal screaming in protest, but the airliner stabilized just enough. The F-22s executed protective sweeps, diverting turbulence and creating a corridor through the smoke-choked sky. Inside Flight 927, the passengers were oblivious to the precise maneuvers saving their lives. Mothers clutched children, elderly passengers whispered prayers, and the screaming blended with the roar of the engines. Ray imagined each of them, letting their fear fuel her focus, guiding her hands with a single, unyielding purpose. Survival depended on her every decision. The runway was almost in sight now, partially obscured by smoke. Ray adjusted the Hercules angle, reducing descent speed, maintaining lift, and keeping Flight 927 perfectly aligned. Sparks from the airliner's engine flared dangerously high. Jamal's hands were tight on the controls, eyes wide, instruments flashing warnings. Ray's voice was calm, steady. "We're almost there, stay with me." The Hercules tilted slightly, nudging Flight 927 forward, airflow stabilizing its descent. The burning plane trembled, but the trajectory was manageable. The runway was closer, the gap narrowing. Every meter was a battle against gravity, turbulence, and structural failure. Ray felt the strain in the Hercules' wings, every vibration a reminder that the aircraft was being pushed to its limits. Hawk's voice came through. "Shadow, you've got visual, corridor clear, final alignment now." Ray tightened her grip, nudging the plane with surgical precision, using the massive Hercules to create the final cushion of airflow. Flight 927 responded perfectly, descending slowly toward the runway. Sparks from the engine flared one last time. The F-22s maintained protective sweeps, engines screaming, guiding them toward salvation. The airstrip was directly below now, a narrow lifeline. Ray exhaled slowly, hands steady. Flight 927 was aligned perfectly, descending at a manageable rate. Her pulse raced, adrenaline surged, but her focus was absolute. This was the culmination of every skill she had ever learned, every maneuver she had mastered, every split-second decision she had trained for. Then the final jolt. Flight 927 pitched slightly again, engine flames threatening to flare higher. Ray reacted instantly, nudging the Hercules to stabilize it for the final descent. The F-22s executed protective sweeps, clearing the path of turbulent air, creating a corridor through the smoke and wind. The runway grew larger in the HUD, clearer within reach. "Steady, steady," Ray whispered. Flight 927 touched down, wheels kissing the asphalt with a shuddering, grinding roar. Sparks flew from the landing gear, smoke filled the air, but the plane held. Ray guided the Hercules alongside, airflow keeping the airliner aligned. Jamal's voice broke through, awestruck. "Captain, we did it. We're alive." Passengers erupted in screams, cries, and prayers. The miracle had happened. Flight 927 was down. 300 lives were saved. Ray exhaled, tension flooding out of her body, though the Hercules still groaned under maximum stress. Hawk's voice cut in, calm but unmistakably awed. "Shadow, you just did what no one thought possible. Unbelievable." Ray allowed herself a brief, exhausted smile. But even as the applause erupted and the passengers evacuated, Ray knew the world would never truly see the scope of the miracle that had just unfolded above the Rockies. For her, for Hawk, for the F-22 pilots who had assisted, it was a testament to skill, courage, and the convergence of past and present. She had been Top Gun once, and today, that legacy had saved hundreds of lives. The roar of engines faded, replaced by the chaotic cacophony of emergency crews, sirens, and the cries of passengers finally safe on solid ground. Captain Ray Shadow Walker exhaled, the tension of the last harrowing hour leaving her body in trembling waves. Every muscle ached, every nerve screamed, but the miracle had been accomplished. Flight 927 had landed. 300 lives had been saved. And yet, as the adrenaline ebbed, a new reality rushed forward. The F-22s, still circling overhead for final clearance, descended slowly to hover above the runway. Hawk's voice crackled through the radio once more. "Shadow, I don't even know how to say this, but the Navy and the world needs to know who you really are." Ray's hands tightened on the yoke. She had spent nearly a decade burying her past, choosing the quiet anonymity of cargo flights over the spotlight of Top Gun fame. She had wanted a life without recognition, without expectation. Yet here it was. Her skills had saved hundreds of lives, and the Navy's finest pilots were vouching for her in real time. Hawk's voice was both incredulous and admiring. "You weren't just a cargo pilot today. You were Top Gun incarnate, and everyone watching us from command, they know it too." Ray exhaled slowly, letting the weight of both relief and exposure settle over her. The emergency crews guided the Hercules and Flight 927 safely to taxiways. Ray's co-pilot, Lieutenant Jamal Reed, leaned back, exhausted but elated. "Captain, you did it. You saved them all." Ray allowed herself a tired smile, glancing at the burning fuselage of Flight 927, now stabilized. Sparks still flickered faintly, smoke curling into the morning sky, but the danger was over. 300 lives had been delivered from the edge of death to safety. Then the media arrived. News helicopters buzzed overhead, reporters shouted into cameras, and phones recorded every moment. The passengers emerged, blinking in the sunlight, faces streaked with tears and soot, expressions of disbelief and gratitude. Questions flew, stories began forming, and in the midst of it all, Ray's identity, long hidden, deliberately obscured, was about to explode into public consciousness. One of the F-22 pilots, a young lieutenant, leaned over his radio. "Shadow, they're asking for your call sign. They're showing footage from our formation. They're going to know." Ray's jaw tightened. Years of careful concealment, the years she had worked quietly, anonymously as a cargo pilot, were unraveling in seconds, but there was no turning back. She exhaled, steadying herself. "Let them see," she murmured. Within moments, the footage was live. Military and civilian media outlets broadcasted the F-22 formation, guiding a massive cargo plane alongside a burning airliner, captions revealing the call sign, "Shadow." Comments exploded online, hashtags trended, and viewers across the country watched in awe as the heroism unfolded before their eyes. And with the revelation came another truth. Ray Walker, once a celebrated Top Gun pilot, had returned to save 300 lives using skills she had hidden for years. Command officers arrived at the airstrip, their expressions a mix of awe, respect, and surprise. Admiral Thomas Caldwell, known for his stoic demeanor, approached Ray. "Captain Walker," he began, voice formal yet tinged with admiration, "we knew you had exceptional skill. What you've done today is beyond extraordinary. Top Gun, Shadow, it's all true, isn't it?" Ray nodded, a weary but proud smile crossing her face. "Yes, sir, I left that life behind. But it looks like it came back when it mattered most." Hawk, still hovering nearby in his F-22, radioed in with a hint of playful incredulity. "Shadow, I'm not sure whether to congratulate you or to tell you you're insane. Either way, you're a legend." Ray chuckled softly, tension finally breaking, letting herself feel the surreal weight of recognition. For years, she had flown quietly, saving cargo, avoiding headlines. Today, the world had seen her, not just the cargo pilot, but the fighter pilot, the Top Gun, the miracle worker. The passengers began sharing their stories. Tears, hugs, laughter, and gratitude collided into a torrent of raw emotion. Mothers clutched children, elderly men shook Ray's hand, young couples embraced. They spoke of courage, of the feeling that someone unseen had guided them through death itself. Ray listened quietly, letting the emotions wash over her, allowing herself a rare moment of connection. Every scream, every prayer, every tear had been worth it. Military command issued statements, praising the seamless coordination between the F-22s and the cargo aircraft, acknowledging Ray's leadership and skill. Social media exploded. Videos went viral. Hashtags trended. Top Gun returns, Shadow saves lives, Hercules hero. Analysts dissected her maneuvers, pilots debated the precision required, and ordinary citizens marveled at the seemingly impossible feat. For the first time in years, Ray Walker was not just Shadow, she was a national hero. Yet amidst the recognition, there was still personal reckoning. She had spent nearly a decade hiding from the spotlight, and now it was inescapable. Reporters pressed questions. Were you aware of the danger? How did you stay calm? Did your Top Gun training make the difference? Ray answered carefully, thoughtfully, each word measured yet honest. She spoke of skill, instinct, courage, and the responsibility of human life. And though the world was watching, she felt a deep, private satisfaction. Jamal leaned back, exhausted but awestruck. Captain, you didn't just save them. You changed everything about how people see us, see pilots. You're legendary. Ray allowed herself a tired laugh. She knew he was right, but even with all the attention, all the recognition, all the accolades, one truth remained. The mission had been about others, about saving lives, about courage in action. And that truth, unlike headlines or fame, would remain forever. Hawk joined her on the airstrip later, the sun dipping behind the Rockies, painting the sky in fiery oranges and reds. Shadow, he said quietly, you've reminded all of us why we fly, why we push ourselves, why we trust skill and instinct. Today, you didn't just save lives. You reminded the world what it means to be Top Gun. Ray nodded, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Recognition, pride, relief, they all mingled. But most of all, she felt gratitude. For the F-22 pilots, for her co-pilot, for every life saved. The media frenzy continued, but Ray found a quiet corner. She looked at the mountains, at the airstrip, at the exhausted but grateful passengers being escorted to safety. A decade of anonymity, of quiet cargo flights had ended, not with fame but with a purpose fulfilled. She had returned to her past skills when the world needed her most, merging experience, courage, and instinct into a singular, impossible mission. And now, the world knew. Command arranged a formal debrief. Admiral Caldwell approached once more, clipboard in hand but eyes full of respect. Captain Walker, your actions today will be studied for decades. Top Gun, cargo pilot, hero, whatever title fits, you've earned it. Ray allowed herself a small smile, a mixture of pride and relief. She had avoided the spotlight for years, but today she had no choice. And yet she realized she didn't mind. Not anymore. As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows over the runway, Ray watched Flight 927's passengers disappear into ambulances and rescue vehicles. The Herc and the F-22s were parked, engines cooling, but the energy of the day still lingered in the air. Ray breathed deeply. She had returned to her past, faced impossible odds, saved hundreds of lives, and emerged not only victorious but revealed. Shadow was no longer a ghost. She was a legend. And as the world watched, the headlines flashed. Cargo pilot saves 300 lives, Top Gun returns. For Ray Walker, it wasn't about fame. It was about courage, instinct, and the irreplaceable value of human life. But for the millions witnessing, it was a revelation. Sometimes heroes hide in plain sight. Sometimes the most extraordinary acts come from those you least expect. And sometimes the skis themselves bear witness to miracles.